student at University of Manitoba, along with fellow student Catherine Lozano. So I'll start by briefly describing what we term an intelligent interactive system, just so that everyone's kind of on the same page. We say that or we'll also call them IAS throughout the presentation for brevity. So these IAS are systems that use some machine intelligence to provide the user with a personalized experience, generally increasing efficiency while they're at it. Because of all the machine intelligence techniques that go into these things, users sometimes hear that they're very complex, or they appear very complex to them and unpredictable. And yeah, this can affect the way that the users understand and interact with the systems. So previous studies in IAS have always encouraged explanations. Explanations offset many of the negatives associated with them, but we still are left with this question of whether or not users always want or need more information on these systems. This is an important question because system designers have to work with constrained resources, time and money particularly, and effective explanation facilities are both expensive and time-consuming to create. So most studies in the past have been laboratory-based, focusing on highly complex systems that make high-cost decisions. So I'm talking about things like medical diagnostic systems where worst case scenario is really, really bad. Somebody could die, or you prescribe a medicine that somebody's allergic to and they end up in the hospital because of it. So these studies have, the rest of the studies have frequently focused on enhancing understanding because of previous work up to that point saying that there always should be explanations. They never considered whether or not there were systems where this wasn't necessarily the case. Now though, we know that explanation viewing takes time, and in the real world, people covet their time. Our understanding is missing the effects of long-term use of IAS and the pressures of time on those that exist in real life on users and on their information needs. So we conducted 2 studies that kind of focus on these issues. So the first study was a series of semi-structured interviews. We conducted it with 21 participants, the majority of whom were undergraduate students, and none of them had any formal computer training. We asked the users to simply talk about the systems that they use in their daily lives. Some examples of these systems that they did choose to talk about include Google suggestions, or YouTube suggestions, sorry, YouTube suggested videos, and Google Suggest. Other ones that were common were Facebook Friend Finder, the iTunes Genius application, and there were a bunch of other ones. So all of these systems share a few properties. Okay? First, all the systems help the participants with fairly unimportant tasks. Okay? I'm not saying that it's unimportant to a user, but the cost isn't going to kill someone. It's going to cost them a few seconds at worst, or give them slightly bad results. So mistakes, being low cost, imperfect results probably didn't matter that much to the users. Second, each system was used with high frequency. In some cases, on a daily basis, Google Suggest, for instance, most of the users used every day. So users are given frequent opportunities to engage with and think about these systems. Whether or not they're actively thinking about them, they still have that opportunity. There were also no meaningful explanations in these systems. So if users did want more information on them, they'd have to seek it out themselves, generally through Google. But they also could have looked in manuals. Cell phone text entry was a common one that people talked about, and the only place that you could find information on that was in manuals. And finally, the one other commonality that we noticed was that each of these systems was commercially successful. We did kind of design it that way. We allowed the users to tell us what systems they thought fell under these categories. We explained what it was, had them tell us again what they thought, and then we made some suggestions ourselves from the commercially successful ones that we knew of. So in the interviews, we addressed a number of topics. First, we asked the participants about how they thought they benefited from the systems. We asked how accurate they found they were, how they thought the systems worked, to give us an idea of their mental model surrounding this, and whether they actually wanted more information. We were aiming to shed light on how the users use the systems in order to see if there was a need for improvement, and to expose in what areas that need might actually exist. So after the interviews, we constructed affinity diagrams and came up with a big list of groups of comments, and I'm going to get into a few of them. Part of this understanding of why the users are using the systems, or part of our understanding needs to be why the users are using the systems and where the systems are failing. So first, I do want to mention that the majority of users did find the systems highly useful in their daily use. The most common reason for this was that they thought the systems saved them time. Participant 18, for instance, expresses this by saying, about Google Suggest, saying, at some point, if you want to go to YouTube, you just hit Y. It's the first one. It's always about going quicker and faster when you're browsing the internet. So this idea of being quick and fast came up over and over again in all the domains that we looked at. Another common utilization of it was for domain exploration. Participant 3 here is talking about iTunes Genius when she says, actually it's good because there are a lot of songs I never knew were out. I don't listen to radio as much anymore because of the iPod. I enjoyed that one because it was Apple killing its own product, but or enforcing its own product, I suppose. So while while users did overwhelmingly find the IIS very useful, there were a number of complaints, a number of things they thought were detrimental. The number one was that they occasionally found these systems unsophisticated, such as P11 saying here about YouTube. If I select one song from one band, usually on that recommendation list is just another version or just other versions of the same song. This feeling was often the case when the systems would provide abhorrent results, so things that they weren't expecting or that were repetitive. Other users feared that there were commercial motivations behind the choices the systems made, and so they didn't really look at them very much. P6, for instance, or participant 6, for instance, expressed that her concern when speaking about Amazon, maybe this company pay money to advertise. One thing that we did find interesting about this perceived utility was that no users commented directly on the lack of transparency being a flaw. This is definitely contrary to what we expected from the focus of previous work. So, as I mentioned before, we asked users how they thought the systems worked. The goal of this was determining the accuracy of their mental models, which affect the level of benefit that the users derive from the system. And also, if the users already know how the systems work, there's not really much reason for having explanation facilities in those systems. So we mapped mental models on 2 dimensions, plausibility and detail. Plausibility we based on whether or not the user's description of how the system worked could actually generate the desired result. And detail was judged on whether participants mentioned appropriate data sources and talked about how those data sources would be combined in a situation where there's more than one. So participants were able to answer how they thought a system worked in both a plausible and detailed way about 20% of the time. Not that high, honestly, but participant 10, for instance, says that their cell phone's autocorrect stores a dictionary of words and tries to intelligently guess which word you're going for, based on the grammar and where you're going with the sentence. Words that you use most come up most frequently, and so on. On the other end of the spectrum, only about 10% of the time, participants gave answers that were both vague and incorrect. So participant 5, for instance, thinks that she may have heard how Google Suggest worked in the past. Geez, I can't remember. Is it that P2P thing? So the vast majority, the other 70%, fell in between these 2 extremes, generally with the answer being plausible, but not very detailed. We did try to encourage them to give us more detail, and it remained undetailed generally in these cases. So participant 20, for instance, attempts to explain how Google Suggest works, saying probably when other people have searched, probably what's on the website maybe. I guess sometimes when you search before, they usually come up first. This was missing how these things would be combined. They're talking about some of the data sources, but not really clear on how those sources are being used. So when we asked whether participants wanted more information on how the system worked, they're split pretty well down the middle. Initially, we got a pretty well 50-50 break. The desire seemed to be based more on the individual than on the system, where certain participants were almost always going to say, yes, I'd like more information on that, and the others would almost always say, no, I don't want more information about that. So the vast majority of the time when participants did say they wanted more explanations, they credited that desire to a simple thirst for knowledge. Participant 8 here is saying, in this life you need information, you need to know a lot of things or else you'll be left behind. So these comments were often preceded by a statement indicating that they didn't really know why they wanted more information. Okay, so a little bit more interesting, I think, is why they didn't want information. Often it was due to bad behavior. I've only got 2 minutes, so I'm going to speed through this, unfortunately. The bottom line mattering, so I don't really care how things work, just that they do. And they thought that they already knew enough. So we looked at the explanations that they gave for how the systems worked and found that there was a mix of accuracy, but participants were never outright wrong. So if they said they knew how it worked, they at least were falling within that 70%, not in the 10% that didn't know. So finally, the idea that they didn't see any benefits by learning how that thing worked was the other reason. So in summary, for the first study, we had high appreciation of the systems with adequate comprehensibility. There was room for improvement, which explanations would help. and we had a low desire for the explanations overall. So then we conducted a diary study mainly to ameliorate the issue of this idea that participants were reflecting well after their use. And we had the first two questions, useful and accurate, were 7-point Likert scales. Meeting expectations and more information were open questions. So we have the usefulness and accuracy diagram here. You see that they did find them very useful and accurate. 21% were neutral or below for usefulness, 23% for accuracy, so there was room for improvement again. And generally, they met expectations, but users still didn't really want more explanations. We did find that explanations were more likely when the participant gave low accuracy and usefulness ratings. So, putting everything together, we have a few design implications. In certain systems, we found that explanations are not always critical. I'm out of time. And that there is room to improve mental models, but in order to do that, it probably requires a very detailed explanation. And unfortunately, we're not sure how to deliver it to them because the users don't really want them. So I suppose there were a couple of limitations that I should mention. Even our diary study involves some self-reflection because they did their diary entries once a day. They had preconceived notions of what the explanations would look like, so we didn't try to tell them or give them an idea, oh, well, it might look like this or it might look like that. That would be a future study. And the system and user characteristics that make up these things we didn't necessarily isolate. We did find that these everyday ones fall within this category of not needing more explanations, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other systems that fall within it, or that it wasn't generalizable to users who happen to be undergrads with no computer science backgrounds. So I'd like to thank you, and I'll take any questions you have.
Okay, questions?
Thank you very much. I was wondering how many participants you had and what their background was.
Okay, so the participants were all undergrads. They had no computer science experience. They had taken no courses. Most of them were in their first year for both studies. There are different participants. The first one had 21 participants, and the second one, pop back up there, wasn't as involved in this study as in the first one. Apparently, I did not record. Oh, 14. There we go. Yes. And so we ended up collecting 160 diary entries from those 14 participants. It was over 2 weeks. Yes.
I guess this is really interesting. So I guess this is an updated version of how things work, right? And I'm just wondering if there are differences in the offline world and the online world. So for example, I don't know how my car works really, but I sort of get by. Or maybe I read the manual if it's extreme. I'm just wondering, can you speculate a little bit on the differences between this sort of new world and the old world of how things work?
Oh, well, I mean, that's a very good allegory. There is this perception out there, we don't need to know how these cars work anymore. There are people who are specialized to do this. Same idea with these systems, that as long as it's working, that's what matters, and as long as you can get fixed, right? And so users did want that ability to customize, much as we do, and thought that that would be the only reason to have an idea of how it does work. So,
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so you know, the state of the art is evolving very, very quickly. This isn't a criticism of your study because you only study what's here now, right? But I think that, especially, you know, if you pick something like explanations, it seems to me that over the next few years and stuff, that's going to evolve very, very rapidly. And you know, the kind of things that we have now are really extremely primitive in terms of explanation. So for YouTube to say, we're showing you this video because you watched another video like it, you know, thanks, that's really helpful. You know? So even the kind of thing, so I mean, I don't even know that these examples would really count as much of explanations. And then of course people are conditioned by you know, a lot of bad or unhelpful software, so they'll say, oh yeah, that's probably an advertisement because sites are always throwing advertisements at me, you know, or you know, the feedback might not be actionable because you don't have stuff. And all those considerations, I think, are going to change very rapidly. So, I mean, you did hedge your results in some of those ways, and I think that, but just you know, I don't know, we need to frame that conclusion a little bit so we don't have the situation of, you know, in 2020, people saying, yeah, I was thinking about putting an explanation in my system, but Lount proved that was useless back in IUI 12.
Yeah, so I did try to point out that these things are already successful, that people are using every day, so these people have experience with these systems. It's not like you're creating a system brand new, putting it out there, and expecting them to just automatically learn these things. These are systems that are out there being used every day. The users are developing some kind of mental model about them that seems to be fairly, well, at least they were fairly accurate, if not very detailed. So, yeah, I don't think that you can necessarily just ignore explanations, but for low-cost things, I don't that you expect to be used very frequently, every day, short time frame, it might be better to put resources elsewhere, would be my thoughts, if you're working with constrained resources.
So one thing that wasn't clear to me when you were describing this to the participants, was there a notion of a possibility for actionable stuff, right? Could they actually modify, for example, the system had they understood how it worked?
So
was that proposed, or was it just an explanation?
They expressed interest in doing that. I unfortunately had to skip a number of my slides, but we didn't necessarily propose it, it was more asking them how they thought they could benefit from these things, and why they would want explanations, and a number of the users did say that they would only want explanations if there was some way that they could modify the behavior, and that the explanation would help them do that.
Any more questions? Okay, all right, so I guess I want to apologize to the presenters that maybe we went too quickly because we're ending the session early, but I'll give you a little bit more time leading up to lunch. Okay, so thank you very much. Let's have a hand for all the credentials.